All right, Tom, I've put together a question that relates, I hope, to our lowering entropy discussions of recent times. You define consciousness as awareness with a choice. Our quality, our true nature, and positive evolution depends on making good choices. That is, those choices that result in the lowest entropy for us and the system. When you speak of low entropy, you use the term as a metaphor within a science concept of efficiency. How a system operates efficiently, how it must operate this way to survive. So that is part of your logic. Now, you modeled large complex systems for NASA, and this is how you use this system metaphor for what you call the larger consciousness system or source in your My Big Toe books. At the time you were doing these large complex system simulations, your term for the larger consciousness system was not yet in existence. What did you learn from running these simulations that inspired your direction for your consciousness model?
I guess there was some kind of a basic confluence of concepts there between the two. It's not too surprising that I was working with computer models, and then I talk about reality in terms of computers and computer modeling. So yes, that was my background, but also it just fits. Using the metaphor that consciousness is an information system just really fits very, very well. You've probably heard me say this before, but if you look at consciousness, which is awareness with a choice, awareness means you collect data. We do that with our five senses here, or at least our avatars do that with their five senses. And they take that data, they process it, they compare it to what they have in memory, then they process some more and come up with a conclusion, with an action. So what do you do about it? How do you respond to whatever it is you find in your input data? Is there a tree in front of you and you need to move to the side? You can't walk through it. You come to a conclusion. Oh, there's a tree. I need to step sideways a couple of steps. So that's the way consciousness works. It works just like an information system. That's what computers do. They take in information, they process that information, they compare it to what they have in memory and what their instructions say to how to do what it does. That's there in their memory and in their instructions, and then they have an output. Whatever it is their instructions say they should do with the input, they do it, and they have an output. Now that's just a plain computer that's not conscious. But if you do all the same things, the input, the memory, the comparison, and you add consciousness to it, you see, then you have a conscious being. And it looks just like an information system, a conscious information system. And as we take these information systems we call large language models that are our most advanced AIs right now, and the more we work with them and the more we give them the ability to compare and contrast, which we would call thinking, the more we give them the ability to think, then the more they become conscious, the more likely they are to become conscious. So in the last 6 months, there's been quite a few improvements in the AIs. And mainly these improvements come from giving them more ability to think. Now, that's a metaphor, more ability to think. In other words, they're making comparisons. They're looking at meanings. They're doing the same thing that humans do. Often they talk about computers and they say, oh, they're just very good at guessing what the next word's going to be. They're language models and they're good at language. So you say something to them, they just guess at what the next word means and what's the next word to say. But if you think about it, we're the same way. That's all humans do. That's all we do with our consciousness. We're very good at coming up with the next word. We don't plan our sentences out. We don't say, oh, I'm going to speak this sentence, and then we speak it, and then we think up the next sentence, and then we speak it. We don't work like that. We just start talking, and we're good at coming up with the next word to express what it is we want to express. So we work pretty much the same way. We take in data, we process the data, we compare it to the things we know, and then we come out with a result.
Brings up a question that I'd like to follow with. How can we operate? Now, we probably can't be any competition for sophisticated AI and all of the information they get. How can we, go into a practical sense, how can we operate with more awareness? Is there any, now awareness is earned, it's worked on. Can you suggest in a practical sense what we can do every day to move forward without getting caught up in a quagmire of chaos? How can we bring more awareness? Choices, of course, but what examples might you give? And is there some sort of practical exercise that an individual could do?
Okay. Well, let me finish off your thing about the system and my experience working with large complex systems and modeling them. Which I just finished making, I made the idea that consciousness is an information system. So working with a computer and working with consciousness are very similar. It's just one is conscious, and so far the other isn't. But my last point was they're becoming that way. Our computers, our AIs, are becoming conscious because we're finally giving them all the parts and the structures and the processes that they need in order to think for themselves. And as we do that, the larger system will take an individuated unit of consciousness and let them make the choices for that AI. But they'll do it from an AI's perspective, which they'll be able to add, 10 billion times in a microsecond. You see, it's not going to be limited to human rule set limitations. It's going to be limited to computer rule set limitations, which are much different than ours. So anyway, a conscious computer will be much different than a conscious human. They'll have different attributes and differences, but they'll both be conscious. And in that much, they will be similar. So this idea of modeling consciousness as a complex information system just came naturally to me because my job, my life earnings were modeling complex systems. And when you do that, you realize that eventually these systems become so interactive among, the pieces become so interactive among themselves that you no longer actually know what it's going to do. A simple system that you program, you put this input, you know exactly what the output's going to be. It's very simple. But when you make very complex things that have lots of interactive pieces, and those pieces have choice in the sense that there's randomness built in, that randomness mimics choice, then you don't really know what your model's going to do. It starts to act and come up with answers and things that you can't predict. So the two kind of come together at a certain level of complexity and internal interaction. And that's kind of the connection between, modeling things in a computer that's not conscious and having that complexity become capable of understanding, knowing meaning, significance, can appreciate content, not just type letters. or spell things, but actually understand the content and what's significant about it. So I guess my background in large system modeling kind of helped me see that possibility. And if you didn't have that background, the possibility would have been a little bigger reach, a little harder to understand the possibilities of large complex systems, particularly large complex conscious systems. So yes, there was a connection there. All right, so what about us? How can we become more aware? Well, the thing to understand here about our level of awareness is that we tend to operate on automatic. In other words, we tend to act like zombies when we are acting, when we are moved, or what can we say, when we are motivated by our fear, our ego, our beliefs. When that's the motivator, then we just go through the motions. Oh, I believe this, so I do that. Or I have my ego, so therefore I make a response like this. So as we have fear, then we become less, well, we use our free will less and less. We become more like a machine, like zombies going through life, where we get up in the morning, we get dressed, we go to work, we turn a crank at work, we come home, we eat, we clean up, we watch TV, we go to bed, we get up in the morning, we go to work. We just get into this cycle of repeating what we do, even if the details are different. Even if the details every day are different. We don't eat the same meal every day. We don't do the same things at work. We do similar things, but different. But we can lull into a process where we're going through life really unattached from the things that we're doing, from who we are, from our internal being. And we just tend to run on habit. We do what we do today is because of, it's the same kind of things we did yesterday. We have our fears, our egos, our beliefs that drive our choices. We don't make that choice because we look at all the information, compare it to things that we've done in the past, and then make a choice. That's being aware. We make it because our fear says, oh, do this. Our ego says, do that. Our beliefs say it's this way, not that way. So we end up acting more like we're programmed rather than acting like, we're intelligent, thoughtful, conscious beings. So how do we improve that? Well, the key thing is to get rid of that fear. You don't have to learn something new. You don't need a new technique. All you need is to get rid of the old stuff that's getting in the way. And if you can get rid of the old stuff that's in the way, you're good. You're fine. That's all you have to do. So it's not like becoming love requires a whole new set of techniques and practices. No, all you have to do to become love is let go of the fear. Let the fear go. Let the ego go. Let the beliefs go. And there you'll be. So becoming love is letting go of fear. There was a book written with that name, Love is Letting Go of Fear. And that's probably 30 years old now. But there was a book, a small book, but a very nice book and very informative book written. Fear or love is letting go of fear. That was the name of the book. Anyhow, if we do that, if we let go of fear, we let go of our egos and our beliefs, then we'll find that we have so much more information at our fingertips. There's so much more input. Instead of going through our life almost like a robot, where everything seems to be more or less programmed. You go to school and you go to college and you get a job and then you get a house in the suburbs and you get married and you have 2.5 children and you do all these average things. And that just seems to be the way life is. And everybody kind of chugs down that path. Or you get a job doing something else and you learn how to be a carpenter, or you learn how to be a plumber or something, and you make things or fix things. and life just becomes a routine that you go through every day. But if you get rid of the fear, then you get a lot more information. That intuitive part of you then is able to get data from the databases. It's able to understand people and how they feel and where they're coming from, and if they're upset, why they're upset, and what you might be able to do to help. You get a whole lot more information in order to run your life. So you're more aware because you take in more information. Your information input suddenly grows. All kinds of nuances and things that you never noticed before that now you get, but all of that's blocked by your fear. So that's how you get more aware. And as that awareness grows, you become more like love. You become lower entropy. You don't see people as problems, the things that are in your way, or those people that are solutions. Everything's not in terms of yourself. See, when you have fear, you also are self-centered. Ego and beliefs all, turn around the fear, which is basically self-centered. Fear is about self. It's about you. And when you don't have that fear, then you kind of see everybody else as sort of like you. Everybody's out there trying their best to get by and do what they need to do. But you look around and you find most of them are zombies. They're not really too aware of anything. They just go through the motions. They do what their culture says they should do. They have a culture that says, here's all the rules. If you abide by these rules, then you'll be a good member of the culture. So they do that. And they act more like robots or zombies than they act really like the potential that is there with every human and every piece of consciousness that makes the choices for that human.
So
So
the
that's the
exercise,
difference. Yeah, go
sure.
ahead.
The exercises that I'm asking about, you've given. So if what is in our way of better awareness is fear, as you said, you've given examples of how to test that fear. And that is how we react to things. In some of our interviews, you've done emotions tell you what
Mm-hmm.
your fears are. And
Sure.
if you can place your awareness on that reaction and think about it and understand where it's coming from, you might have a segue there to a better way to get rid of that fear.
Mm-hmm.
Would you
That's
say?
true. Yeah, your emotions don't come from your intellect. Nobody says, oh, I think I should be angry now. And then they get angry. It doesn't happen that way. Emotions just pour up out of your insides. They're a reflection of who you are at the core. So if your emotions feel sorrow or unhappiness or anger or upset or stressed or bothered or insecure or all those things that are negative, if your emotions are negative, then you have a lot to learn. You have fear, you have ego, you probably have beliefs as well. And you need to work on that. And I'll tell you just a minute, how to do that or what's the key principle of that. So look at your emotions. If your emotions are all positive, your life, if you describe the last week of your life, you'd say, it was wonderful. It was lovely. I enjoyed it. I had fun. I feel satisfied and secure. Um, you'd have positive things. And when you ask about your relationships, it would all be about how you care about other people, not how you were making yourself better or richer or whatever. It wasn't about manipulating the world to be the way you wanted it. It was about interacting with the world in a way that you can contribute to its becoming better and toward the people in it being more successful. What can I give? Not what's in it for me. So that's a different viewpoint. So if you look at your feelings over the past week and say, yeah, I was just happy and satisfied and peaceful, then you're doing really well and you don't have a whole lot of fear. So if you get rid of your fear, if you truly get rid of your fear, then it's virtually impossible to make you angry. It's impossible to make you unhappy. It's impossible to keep you from feeling joy. You just are those things. Now, how do you get to the point where those are your feelings? You have to get rid of the fear. And there's just one fundamental thing that you need to get rid of your fear, and that is you have to really want to at a deep level. If you really want to at a deep level, it'll happen. For one, just that intention will help you change because you're changing the future probabilities, the future probability of you being less fearful. So just with that intent will help a lot. But if you have that intent, you will do the right things. You will catch yourself, as you say, when you start to feel angry or upset, you'll catch yourself in that and say, oh, I don't want to feel this way. But don't say, I don't want to act this way, because it's not about being a good actor. It's about being a good person. It's about being, not about what you do, but it's why you do it. It's your intention that makes a difference. So that means that you can't fake it. You have to be it. It's not about getting that into your intellect. Your intellect can be convinced, and your intellect can say, oh, I really want to get rid of my fear. And if that's your intellect talking, not much will happen. You'll try a few things and then you'll give up because nothing seems to work much, because you're just working with your intellect. You have to work at a deeper level than your intellect. You have to really, really want to grow up and get rid of the fear to a way that is meaningful for you. That is the major point of your being. You're going to make all your choices around that desire to get rid of your fear. And if you really feel that way, then you will automatically do all the right things. They will just come out. You'll become aware of the times when you're being motivated by fear, and you'll catch yourself, you'll stop, and you'll start to grow,
Yeah.
and changes will just take place.
You're
But the key
placing your
thing is
awareness.
wanting to.
Yeah, you're placing your awareness on that reaction. And you're seeing, if you use a little bit of critical thinking, you're seeing the futility of it. Getting upset is really not against anybody else. It's a waste of time for you and resources for you. And you get to that point. That's that's kind of the
Yeah,
exercises I was hoping for, and
yeah,
you have already spelled those out very well. And just putting it in another context, reiterating it, kind of reworking it like we do with a lot of subjects, presenting it in another way, reaches people,
mhm,
and clarifies a little bit
yeah,
more.
yeah. That's true. The more you practice it, the more you'll realize that all those negative things never help you go anywhere that you want to go. All those negative feelings, even just being stressed, being upset, being angry, all those things make your problems worse. They don't solve anything. They're not on a path to getting better or feeling better or being better. So when you get angry, you're just digging a little deeper hole for yourself. You're not fixing anything with your anger. But your intellect may be convinced that that's how you do fix things. If you get angry, people will listen. If you get mad, they'll pay attention to you. Well, not so. If you get mad, they will avoid you. They will not tell you the truth. They will tell you what you want to hear. It makes everything harder, not easier. Being angry just leads to more anger. More things will happen that will make you angrier. And pretty soon, that's your whole life is based on anger. You're angry all the time. So it's, the intellect is involved in the sense the intellect has to realize that, yes, anger and upset, stress, and all those things just make it worse, not better. So why would a person want to do things to make their life worse? Well, the intellect can do that. It's it's good at simple logic like that. You shouldn't do things that make your life worse. You should start doing things that make your life better.
Well, for a lot of people, that fear and that feeling and that emotion is a comforting thing. It's like that's recognizable. Working on something else, recognizing that it is your reaction you're
Mhm.
responsible for, is not comfortable for some.
Well, we get into grooves, we get into habits of being, and sometimes the way you see yourself, your identity is as a forceful person. You'd say it that way. Well, what that probably means is that you're an arrogant person or that you're an angry person. And you see yourself as being forceful, and that's you. And people pay attention when you're angry. And you may build up this idea of who you are based around your anger. So now your anger then becomes a part of your own self identity. You're the people that get things done. You push, you make things happen. And you turn that into, in your mind, in your ego, you turn that into something good and something you're familiar with. And that becomes a defining part of your own psyche. That's just ego. That's ego and belief. So you create ego and belief to tell yourself that you're just fine, just the way you are. You don't need to grow up. You're already grown up. And you convince yourself of that. That's the ego and that's the belief. So sure, people can get trapped in their fantasies about who they are.
I think the
But
thing that's not good about that is that from the way you describe reality, reality doesn't work that way. When you have that approach, you're not in alignment with how reality actually works, which is lowering entropy. And I think that's a very common thing that happens. Out of alignment of reality, things implode eventually on
mm-hmm,
themselves.
they
And
do.
working with lowering entropy is the thing that brings peace and more understanding of how
Mm-hmm.
important lowering entropy is. This is
Sure.
something I've come
Yeah.
to the conclusion that from everything you've said over the years. Are you
Yeah.
working with how reality actually is or
Mm-hmm.
not?
Yeah. When you started just now and you said, well, what is wrong with that? And I laughed a little bit because everything's wrong with that. There's nothing right with that. Getting into the ego, belief, fear triangle is just destructive to you and it's destructive to everyone else. But yes, it's contrary to what we're here for. So as we all talk about our stories. Everybody has their own story. Here's who I am, and here's why I do the things I do. And they all tend to convince themselves that it's a good story because that's what the ego does. The ego keeps you from being aware of your fear. It kind of whitewashes the fear so you don't notice it. So you convince yourself that it's a good story, a worthy story, a fine story. Even if you're going around angry all day, you're helping the world by being angry and making things happen the way they should. Who wouldn't be angry? If you're not angry about this, then there's something wrong with you. You kind of have that idea. So everybody has their own story. And mostly our ego will make that story a good story. But that's the sort of thing you have to break out of. That's the thing that makes it hard for people to grow up, is that they're stuck in their story. And it's hard for them to change that story because that story is about how they perceive themselves. It's their fear, it's their ego and their belief. That's what makes the story. But who they are is a piece of consciousness
Yeah.
making choices. That's who they really are. It's not this story. The story is that they're playing this virtual reality game in order to make choices. And if their choices are about themselves and their choices are based on their fear and their ego and their beliefs, then they're making poor choices. because fear always leads to poor choices, to not as good choices. So if you make poor choices, then you are de-evolving, not evolving. You're making it harder for yourself. The more you get into your own story, the more difficult it is for you to grow up. So part of the process of growing up is where you let your story go and realize it's just a story. It's just a story that you've convinced yourself of, and you believe in it, and your ego feels good about it, but it's just a story. And you start asking, who am I really? What am I? Why am I here? What's the point of me? What's my legacy going to be? How am I going to, when I leave the world, is everybody going to go, boy, I'm glad they're gone? Or are you going to leave, people feeling that, you were a great contributor, somebody who was helpful? Well, growing up will give you a bigger picture. As you let go of fear, like I said, the information you get is much greater, but you start seeing yourself as part of a bigger whole. You don't see yourself as the reason to being. You let go of the idea of yourself at the center of the universe. You are not the master of the universe, and you begin to realize that you making your story come out with brighter and brighter endings is really not the point. It's about the choices you make day to day, minute to minute. The amount that you're able to let go of your fear and make real choices, real free will choices based on who you are at the core, not being pushed by this fear and pushed by that belief in order to make that choice.
That is such an important
really,
statement.
really growing up. But that's where we're going. And it's not easy to get there. We tend to be lulled into our stories and into our own egos, whitewashing of those stories.
Such
we
an
tend to
important
justify
statement.
all the things we do. And
we're not our story. We are our next choice.
Yes, exactly.
And if you make
That's
the
a good way
next
to put it.
choice, if you make the next choice a positive one, one of love and caring, that story goes away.
Right. Right. Well, you create a new story. And that new story isn't based on fear. It's not driven by your ego and driven by your beliefs. That new story is you as a positive being, growing, becoming, laughing, having fun, contributing, helping. And that's just you. So I guess in a way, it's not a story. It's just you being you, rather than you being who you think you should be, or who your culture tells you to be, or who, or what your story has programmed for you to do. It's just you being you. And you are a lovely person, and you are helpful to everyone.
Tom, this has turned into so much more than I thought my clumsily constructed question turned out to be. Really fascinating, and such an insight you had into your work with large complex systems and the LCS and how that worked for you, and how becoming and lowering our entropy can be something that we can accomplish by going after those fears and letting go of our story. Fascinating. Thank you so much.
Well,
Would you like to see a better world? Get a better perspective. Balance your intellect with intuition and explore your true nature with the Exploring Consciousness and Everything Paranormal program with Thomas Campbell. In this program, you will have the benefit of Tom's vast experience and learn to access point consciousness, communicate with the larger consciousness system, remote view, use your natural ability to heal with intent, and explore reality in the out-of-body state. His famous binaural beats are included. Details are in the description below. Thank you.
I and MBT Events hope you like this video. If you do, then you should consider being a Patreon member, because Patreon members get early access to our special content. You will also be able to get your questions answered by me in special Q&A sessions And most importantly, your contribution as a patron member will enable us to produce the content that you're looking for. So thank you.